Chapter 1. Count William of Warwick. In the fertile, rich, and lovely island of England there lived a most valiant knight, noble by his lineage, and much more for his courage. In his great wisdom and ingenuity he had served the profession of chivalry for many years and with a great deal of honor, and his fame was widely known throughout the world. His name was Count William of Warwick. This was a very strong knight who, in his virile youth, had practiced the use of arms, following wars on sea as well as land, and he had brought many battles to a successful conclusion. The Count found himself at the advanced age of 55, and moved by divine inspiration, he decided to withdraw from the practice of arms and make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land of Jerusalem. The virtuous Count wanted to go because he felt sorrow and contrition for the many deaths he had caused in his youth. That evening he told the Countess, his wife, about his plans, and although she was virtuous and discreet, she became very upset at the news because she loved him so much. In the morning the Count had all his servants, both men and women, come to him, and he said, "My children and most faithful servants, it is the will of His Divine Majesty that I should leave you, and the time of my return is uncertain. Since the journey will be very dangerous, I want to pay each of you now for all the good services you have rendered to me." He had a large chest full of money brought out, and to each of his servants he gave much more than he owed, so that they were all very satisfied. Then he gave the Countess all his lands and all his rights. He ordered that a ring of gold be made with his and the Countess's coat of arms on it, and this ring was made in such a way that it was divided into two parts. Each part was a complete ring in itself, showing half the coat of the arms of each of them, and when the two halves were joined together, the entire coat of arms could be seen. When all this had been done, he turned to the virtuous Countess and said kindly, "I know that you will accept my departure with love and patience, and if it is God's will, my journey will soon be over. I am leaving in your charge everything I have, and here is half of the ring I've made. I beg you dearly to hold on to it in my stead, and to guard it until I return." "Oh dear!" cried the Countess. "Then it's true, my lord, that you are leaving without me? At least allow me to go with you so that I can serve you. I would rather die than go on living without you. Just as when I was thinking that all my misfortunes were over, I see that my unhappiness is only increasing. I am left with only this poor son as a pledge from his father, and his sad mother must be consoled with him." She seized her small son by the hair and pulled it, and then slapped his face, saying, "Cry, my child, cry for your father's departure, and you will be good company to your mother." The tiny infant, who had been born only 3 months before, burst out crying. The Count, seeing both mother and child in tears, felt deeply grieved, and he could not hold back his own tears, and for some time he could not speak, while all 3 of them wept. The Count took his leave of her, kissing her again and again, tears running freely from his eyes. He said farewell to the other ladies, and when he left he took only one squire with him. Leaving his city of Warwick, he boarded a ship and sailed with a good wind, and as time passed, he arrived safely at Alexandria. There he disembarked and made his way to Jerusalem. When he reached Jerusalem, he confessed his sins, and with great devotion he received the precious body of Jesus Christ. Then he entered the holy sepulchre of Jesus Christ and prayed there fervently and tearfully, with great contrition for his sins. After visiting all the other sanctuaries, he returned to Alexandria. Then he boarded a ship and went to Venice. When he was near Venice, he gave all the money still in his possession to his squire, who had served him well, and he arranged a marriage for him so that he would not want to return to England. Then he had his squire spread the news that he had died, and he arranged for merchants to write to England that Count William of Warwick had died while returning from the Holy Land of Jerusalem. When the Countess heard the news, she felt deeply grieved, and went into mourning, and she arranged for the funeral rites that such virtuous knight desired. With the passing of time, the Count returned alone to his own land, having let his hair grow down to his shoulders, while his beard, completely white, reached to his waist. he was dressed in the habit of the glorious Saint Francis, and lived from charity, and he secretly entered a devout hermitage of Our Lady, which was very close to his city of Warwick. This hermitage was a lovely spot on a high mountain with a dense thicket of trees and a clear running spring. The Count retired to this solitary place, and lived alone to escape the materialistic world and to do penance for his sins. Living from charity, he went to his city of Warwick once a week to beg for alms. With his thick beard and long hair, the people there did not recognize him, and he went to the Countess, his wife, to beg. When she saw him asking for charity so humbly, she made them give him more than they gave any of the others, and he spent his poor, miserable life this way for some time. Some time later, the great King of Canary was filled with anger because some pirate ships had plundered a village that belonged to him. He left his land with a large armada, and sailing with a favorable wind, he reached the fertile, peaceful shores of England. In the dark of night, the entire fleet entered the port of Southampton, and all the Moors went ashore very quietly. When they were on land, they put their troops in order and began to attack the island. When the peace-loving king received the news, he gathered as many men as he could to put up a resistance, and went into battle with the Moors. The fighting was great. Indeed, many men died, especially the Christians. Because the Moors were greater in number, the forces of the English king were destroyed. He had to retreat with his remaining men, and he took refuge in a city called St. Thomas of Canterbury, where that holy body now rests. The King of England mustered more men, and when he learnt that the Moors were conquering the island, killing many Christian men and dishonoring the women and young girls, making captives of them all. When this Christian king discovered that the Moors held the pass near a watercourse, he placed his forces in a passage at the hour of midnight. But he did not do it very secretly, and the Moors heard of it and held back until it was broad daylight. Then they pressed them at a very cruel battle where very many Christians died, and those whose lives were spared fled with the unfortunate king, while the Moorish king remained in the camp. Great was the misfortune of this Christian king, who lost 9 battles, one after another, and had to withdraw to the city of London. When the Moors learned of it, they laid siege to the city. Every day there was heavy fighting, until finally the poor king was forced to leave London, and he went towards the mountains, passing through the city of Warwick. When the Countess heard that the king was fleeing to that city, she had food and everything necessary prepared for the night. The Countess, who was a very prudent woman, began to think of how she could strengthen her city so that it would not be lost so quickly, and as soon as she saw the king, she said to him, "Virtuous king, I see that your grace and all of us on this island are in great danger. But sire, if your highness would like to remain in this city, we will find it abundant in provisions and everything necessary for war. My lord and husband William of Warwick, who is count in this land, provided this city and his castle with arms as well as bombards, crossbows and culverins, and many other kinds of artillery. And divine providence, in its mercy, has given us a great abundance of fruit from the land for the last 4 years, so your grace may be safe here." "I am very happy," said the king, "to stay here, and I pray to you, Countess, to arrange things so that my army will have everything they need." The Countess and 2 of her ladies immediately left the king, and went to the magistrates of the city through the houses, making them bring wheat and barley and everything necessary. When the king and his men saw what a great abundance there was of everything, they were very pleased. When the Moors discovered that the king had left the city of London, they pursued him until they learned that he had taken refuge in the city of Warwick. On the way, the Moors attacked and took a castle called Killingsworth, 2 leagues from where the king was. Since they had now conquered a great part of the kingdom, the Moorish king appeared with all his forces before the city of Warwick. The wretched Christian king, seeing that there was no hope, did not know what to do. He climbed to the top of the tower in the castle and watched the huge body of Moors burning and destroying villas and castles, killing as many Christians as they could, both women and men. Those who were able to escape came running and shouting towards the city. Their terrible screams could be heard a good half-league away, and it would have been better for them to die than to become captives of the infidels. As the king watched the immense suffering and destruction, he thought that he would die from all the grief he felt. Unable to look any longer at the desolation, He came down from the tower and went into the small chamber, where he began to sigh deeply. Tears ran from his eyes, and he lamented more gravely than any man has ever done. The stewards were outside the chamber listening to the king's agony, and when he had cried and lamented at length, he said, "Lord, thy compassion and pity will not allow for this. Thy mercy will not allow thy Christian people, great sinners though they may be, to be afflicted by the scourge of the Moors. Rather, defend and pressure them, and let them be returned to thy holy service, so that they may serve thee and praise thee and return glory unto thee." While the poor king was lamenting, he put his head down on the bed, and it seemed to him that he saw a very beautiful lady coming through the doorway to his chamber, dressed in white damask, holding a small child in her hands. Following her were many other ladies, all singing the Magnificat. When he had finished his prayer, the lady walked towards the king, and placing her hand upon his head, she said, "O king, be doubtful of nothing. Be confident that the son and the mother will help you in this great trial. The first man you see with a long beard who asks you for alms in the name of God, kiss him on the mouth as a sign of peace, and beg him graciously to put aside the habit and make him captain over all the people." The poor king awoke and saw nothing. He was astonished at the dream, and he thought about it a great while, remembering everything he had seen. Then he left the chamber, and there stood all the principal knights, who told the king, "Your Grace, all the Moors have set up their tents in front of the city." The king did everything possible to have the city well guarded that night. The following morning, the hermit count climbed the high mountain to gather herbs for his sustenance, and he saw the great number of Moors teeming over all the land. He left his desert habitations and went down into the city. The poor old man, who had spent several days on a diet of nothing but herbs, saw the city was in deep sorrow, and he went to the castle to beg for alms from the countess. When he was inside the castle, he saw the king coming for mass, and when he saw him so nearby, he sank to his knees and begged him in God's name to give him alms. The king remembered the dream and helped him up. Then he kissed him on the mouth, took hold of his hand, and led him into a room. When they had sat down, the king said to him, "I beg you to help and advise us in our time of need, for I see that you are a holy man and a friend of Jesus Christ. I beg you dearly, if you love God, and if you have charity in your heart, cast off the clothing you are wearing for penance, and dress yourself in the clothes of charity, which are arms. For with God's help and your command, we will have a glorious victory over our enemies." When the king had finished these words, the hermit began to speak. "My lord, I am astonished that your grace is asking me, a poor weak man, for advice and help. As your excellency can see, my old, weak body is in a state of decrepitude because of its many years and the harsh life I've led so long on the mountain, eating only herbs and bread. I don't have the strength to bear arms. I beg your excellency to allow me to decline." The king became very pained at this answer and said, "Reverend Father, I kneel at your feet, and with these tears I again beg you, if you are a steadfast Christian, to have compassion on me, a miserable king, and all Christians. All their hope and mine is in the mercy of God and in your great virtue. Don't refuse me this." The painful tears of the king moved the hermit to pity, and his heart softened. After a brief pause, the hermit made the king rise. He said, "Out of love for you, my king, I will obey your commands and try to save you and your kingdoms, and, if necessary, I will place myself in the thick of battle, old as I am, to defend Christianity and bring the haughty Mohammedan sect to its knees, with the understanding that your excellency will be guided by my advice." The king answered, "Reverend Father, since you grant me so much grace, I promise you, on my word as king, that I will not go one step beyond your orders." "Now, my lord," said the hermit, "when you are outside in the great hall, show a happy and very content face to the knights and all the people, and speak to them very complacently. And when you dine, eat well and enjoy yourself, and show much more happiness than you ordinarily do, so that all those who have lost hope will regain it. For a lord or captain should never wear a sad face, no matter how great an adversity there may be, so that his people will not be discouraged. Have some Moorish garments brought to me, and you will see what I am going to do. When I was on my way to the Holy Land of Jerusalem, I stayed in Alexandria, in Beirut, They taught me the Moorish tongue, because I was there many days. In Beirut, I learned to make explosive of certain materials that delay 6 hours before they ignite, but when they do, they could burn up the entire world, and all the water in the world would not be able to extinguish them unless oil and pine resin is used. "This is astonishing," said the king, "that they can only be extinguished with oil or pine resin. I thought water could put out any fire in the world." "No, my lord," said the hermit. "If your grace will allow me to go to the castle gate, I will bring you a special substance, and with clear water or wine you will be able to light a torch." "In faith," said the king, "I will take great pleasure at seeing it." The hermit immediately went to the castle gate, since, when he entered, he had seen quicklime there, and he picked up a little sod and came back to the king. Then he took some water, and throwing it on the quicklime, he lighted it the way a straw lights a candle. The king said, "I would have never been able to believe such a thing if I had not seen it with my own eyes. Now I am certain that there is nothing that men cannot do. I beg you, Reverend Father, please tell me what we need to make the explosives." "My lord," said the hermit, "I will go and buy it, because it is much better to know if the materials are good, and I have made them many times with my own hands. When they are made, sire, I will go to the Moors' camp alone, and put the explosive near the king's tent. At the hour of midnight the explosives will ignite, and all the Moors will run there to put out the fire, and your grace will be armed and waiting with all your men. When you see the huge fire, attack them with all your force, and your lordship may be sure that 10,000 of your men will cause confusion among 100,000 of theirs." The hermit's words pleased the king, and he gave deep thanks to his offer, and was very happy. He immediately gave orders that everything the hermit had commanded should be carried out. The hermit, who had left the king, soon returned with the things they needed for the explosives, and he said to the king, "My lord, there is only one element we lack, but I know that the countess has it. When her husband, William of Warwick, was alive, he had a great deal of it, since it can be used for many things." The king said, "Then I want both of us to go to the countess now and get it." The king sent word to the countess that he wanted to speak with her. When the countess came out of her room, she saw the king and the hermit. "Countess," said the king, "by your grace and virtue, be so kind as to give me a little sulphur, the kind of which causes heat and does not burn itself up, the kind that the count, your husband, put into the torches, so that no matter how much the wind blew, they would not go out." The countess answered, "Who told your grace that my husband William of Warwick could make torches like that, with that kind of flame?" "Countess," said the king, "this hermit standing here." And the countess quickly went to the weapons chamber, and she brought back so much of it that the king was highly pleased. When the king had returned to the great hall where the meal was already prepared, he took the hermit by the hand and sat down at the table, making the hermit sit at his side, honoring him as he deserved. The king's courtiers were astonished at the great honor the king was bestowing upon the hermit, and the countess was even more astonished because she was accustomed to giving him alms. And she said to her ladies, "Oh, how angry I am, at my great ignorance. Why did I not honor this poor hermit much more? Now I see that he must be a man who has led a very holy life." Rising from the table, the King of England gave the hermit permission to go and make the explosives. A few days later, when they were finished, the hermit went to the king and said to him, "Sire, if your grace will give me leave, I will carry out our plan. Your Excellency should have all the men get ready." The king said he would. In the dark of night, the hermit changed into the Moorish clothing that was prepared for him. He went out through a back door of the castle very secretly, and no one saw him. Then he went into the Moors' camp. When he thought the time was right, he threw the explosives into the camp near the tent of a great captain who was a relative of the Moorish king. And when it was almost midnight, the fire broke out, and it grew so great and so terrible that everyone was astonished at the enormous flames. The king and the other Moors, unarmed, hurried to where the fire was greatest in order to put it out. But instead of being extinguished, the more water they threw on it, the more brightly it burned. When the King of England saw the huge fire, he went out of the city armed, and with the few men he still had, he attacked the Moors, and they brought such great destruction to them that it was fearful, and they spared no one. When the Moorish king saw such a large fire and so many of his men dead, he mounted a horse and fled. He took shelter in a castle he had taken, named Killingsworth, together with all those who had escaped the camp, and they recovered their resolve. He and all the other Moors were astonished at how they had been defeated, and they could not understand what had caused such a great disaster, because their forces were 50 times greater than those of the Christians. When the Moors fled, the Christians pillaged their camp, and day was upon them when they entered the city victoriously. After 4 days had passed, the Moorish king sent his emissaries with a letter challenging the King of England, and it said the following: "To you, Christian king who rules the Isle of England, I, Ibrahim, king and lord of Canaria, say to you that if you wish the war between you and me to end, and the killing between your people and mine to cease, let us have a joust, king against king, under the following pacts and agreements. If I should defeat you, you will hold all England under my power and command, and you shall give me 200,000 pieces of gold in tribute each year. If fortune decides that you are the conqueror, I shall return to my own land, and you will remain in yours in peace, and you and all your people will enjoy full peace and tranquility. And in addition, I shall restore to you all the cities and castles I have won and conquered by my own victorious hand." These words are not spoken for vainglory or out of disdain for the royal crown, but so that God, who is great, may give to each that share which, by his merits, he will deserve. The 2 great Moorish knights whom the King of Canary was sending to the city of Warwick as envoys to the King of England left the castle of Killingsworth, and before they departed they sent a messenger to the city to request safe conduct. When the messenger came to the gates of the city, the guards told him to wait a little while, and they would return with a reply. One of the guards quickly went to the king to tell him. After the king had held a brief council, he told the guard to let him in. When the messenger was inside the city, the Count of Salisbury spoke to him and said, "Messenger, on behalf of His Majesty the King, I can tell you that the envoys may come without danger and safety, for they will not be harmed in any way." And the Count gave him a silk garment and 100 pieces of gold. The messenger departed, very content, and before the envoys came, the hermit said to the king, "My lord, let us put fear into the hearts of these Moors. Your Majesty should order 2 grandees to go out to the gates and receive the envoys, and let many men, very well armed, but without helmet, go with them. Have 300 men at the gate to guard it, armed like the others, and let all the ladies and maidens who are able, old as well as young, hang banners in the windows and on the roofs as tall as the women's chests, and each of these women should put armor on her head. And when the envoys pass by, they will see the coats of mail shining and will think they are all warriors. Have 300 guarding the gate follow them by other streets, and let them appear in the square and on the corner. Then, after the envoys have passed by, let them do the same again and again until they reach your highness, and you may be sure that they will be frightened when they see so many soldiers after the battle they have lost. Seeing the great number of men, they will believe that many have come from Spain or France or Germany to help us." The king and all his council thought very highly of the hermit's words. It was decided that the Duke of Lancaster and the Count of Salisbury should receive the envoys, and that 4,000 men should go with them, each wearing a garland of flowers on his head. They went a good mile out of the city to receive the envoys. Then the Duke of Bedford said, "Tell us, father, since there are so many ceremonies to perform for the envoys, how should they find the king, clothed or naked, armed or unarmed?" "That would be a good question," said the hermit, "if it were not so much anger behind your words. But I see the meaning of your words, and that they are intended for more for malice than good. It is because I am old and a hermit that you are trying to bespear my advice and belittle me before my lord the king. Hold your tongue. If you do not, I shall put a bridle in your mouth, and you will make you stop at every turn." At this, the Duke rose to his feet, drew his sword, and said, "If it were not because you are so old and you wear the habit of St. Francis, I should take this sword and cut your skirts right up to the waist." Then the king rose angrily to his feet, seized the Duke, and took the sword out of his hand, and had him imprisoned in the tower. All the other noble lords there calmed the hermit, telling him that because of his age and the habit he wore, he should be forgiving, and he was content to forgive, but the king would not, in spite of all the pleas of the hermit and the other noble lords. In the midst of these troubles, news was brought to the king that the Moorish envoys were approaching, and those who had been chosen went out quickly as they had arranged. When the envoys stood before the king, they gave him the letter. The king commanded that it be read in everyone's presence. The hermit drew near to the king and said to him, "Your Highness, accept the challenge." Then the king said, "I agree to the battle, in accordance with the conditions your king sets down." He begged the envoys to remain there until the following day, when he would give them the formal reply. He showed them to a very comfortable chamber and gave them everything they needed. Then the king convoked a general council, and while it was being prepared, the hermit, along with the other lords, went to the king. He knelt at the king's feet, kissed his hands and feet, and very humbly begged him to give him the keys to the tower so that he could release the duke. The hermit pleaded so much, as did the other lords, that the king was obliged to give them to him. Then the hermit went with the others to the tower where the duke was imprisoned, and there they found a friar hearing his confession, because he was certain he would be killed. When he heard the door open, he was so startled that he felt that he was losing his mind, for he thought they were coming to take him out to execute him. When the hermit saw him, he said, "My lord Duke, if you and I have spoken harmful words to each other, I beg you to forgive me, for I most willingly pardon you." When they had all made their peace, they all returned to the council where the king and all the dukes, counts, and marquises were, and read the letter from the Moorish king once more. Because the king and all the others loved and revered the hermit, and they saw that he led a saintly life, and that he expressed himself well and was knowledgeable about arms, they all agreed that he should be the first to speak, and this led to the following discourse. "I will tell you my opinion, although I realize that I am not worthy to speak of such things, since I know little of the use of arms. Because of the weak disposition of my lord, the king, who is young and has a weak constitution and is sickly, although he has the courage of a virtuous knight, it would not be fitting or just for him to do battle with a man as robust as the Moorish king. Instead, let the Duke of Lancaster, who is the uncle of my lord king, undertake this battle, and let our king grant to him the scepter and the royal crown, so that the Moorish king will not be deceived, and so that he may combat a true king." Scarcely had the hermit spoken these last words when 3 dukes sprang to their feet in great anger, the Duke of Gloucester, the Duke of Bedford, and the Duke of Exeter, and they began to cry loudly that they would not consent for the Duke of Lancaster to enter into battle and be made king, because each of them was more closely related to the king, and it was more just for them to do the battle than for the Duke of Lancaster. The Duke would not permit any further discussion, and he said, "It is not my pleasure that any of you should take my place in battle, since if I have accepted, I wish to carry it out alone." A baron stood up and said the following: "Sire, may your excellency forgive me for what I am about to say. We will never consent to what your highness has said. If our heavenly Father had indeed given you the desire, he has taken from you the strength. We all know that your highness is not ready for such a formidable and arduous battle as this will be. Let your grace be ruled by our counsel and will. If we believed that your excellency were disposed for such an undertaking, we would very willingly have agreed to what your highness has commanded." All the other barons and knights praised what this baron had said. "My most faithful vassals and subjects," said the king, "since it is not to your liking, and you see that I am not fit to combat this Moorish knight, I give you my thanks for this great love you have shown me, and I submit to your will. But it is my wish and my command that no one, under pain of death, shall be so bold as to say that he will take my place in battle, except the one I shall choose, and to him I shall give the crown, the kingdom, and the royal scepter." Then the king said, "Dukes, counts, marquises, and all the rest of my most faithful subjects, I am relinquishing my station, the scepter, and the royal crown, and my title to my beloved Father Hermit." He removed the garments and said, "As I relinquish these royal robes and put them on the Father Hermit, in the same way I relinquish my throne and my station to him, I beg him to accept and to do battle for me with the Moorish king." When the hermit heard the king say these words, he arose quickly because he wished to speak, and all the great lords who were there also stood and gathered so closely to the hermit that they would not let him speak, but instead removed the habit he was clothed in, and made him dress in the royal robes. As the king turned over all his power to the hermit, it was duly noted in the presence of all the council and with the consent of all the barons. When the hermit king heard the pleas of all those in the council, he accepted the kingdom and the battle, and quickly asked them to bring him armor that would fit him well. They brought him many suits of armor, but of all the ones they brought him, there was none he was pleased with. "In faith," said the hermit king, "nothing will stop this battle, even if I have to go dressed in only my shirt." "I beg you, my lords," said the hermit king, "be so good as to go to the countess and entreat her by her great virtue and kindness to lend me the armor of her husband, Sir William of Warwick, which he wore when he went into battle." When the countess saw so many dukes, count, and marquis, and the entire council of the king approaching, and she heard the reason they had come, the virtuous countess gave them a suit of armor of little value. When the king saw it, he said, "This is not the one I asked for. There is another that is much better." All the barons returned once more to the countess and asked for the other armor, and the countess told them that there was no other. When the king heard the answer, he said, "My lords and brothers, let us all go, and we shall try our luck." When they were all before the countess, the king said, "Countess, out of your great kindness and gentility, I beg you to lend me the armor of your husband, Sir William of Warwick." "Sire," said the countess, "may God take this child from me, for I have no other dear thing in the world. I have already sent the armor to you." "That is true," said the king, "but this is not what I asked for. Lend me the armor that is in the small chamber in your bedroom, covered by green and white damask." The countess knelt and said, "Sire, by your mercy and your grace, I beg your majesty to tell me your name and how you came to know of my lord husband, Count William of Warwick." The king answered, "My lady, because you wished me to tell you, I will. I was in his company continually, for in the wars we were brothers in arms." The countess immediately replied, "I beg your lordship to forgive me for not doing all that I could for your highness when you were a hermit. If I had known how close you were to my lord William of Warwick, I would have honored you much more and given you more of my possessions than I did." The king was very content with the words of the countess. "Where there's no heir, there's no need to beg forgiveness. I only ask you, out of your great virtue and gentleness, to lend me the armor I have asked for." The countess immediately had other armor brought to him, covered with the blue brocade. When the king saw it, he said, "Countess, my lady, how well you have kept the arms of your husband. In spite of all the supplications that these lords and I have made to you, you have been unwilling to lend them to us. These are the ones which William of Warwick used in tournaments. The ones I want are the ones are hanging in the alcove and are covered with white and green damask, and with the emblem of a lion wearing a golden crown. And if my entering there would not anger you, countess, I am sure that I would find them." "Oh, wretched me," said the countess. "It is as though you had been raised in this house. Your grace may indeed go in and look, and take everything you wish." When the king saw her willingness, he thanked her, and they all went into her chamber and saw them hanging there. The king had them brought to him, and he had them repaired. The battle was arranged for the following day. In the evening the king went to the main church and stayed there all night, kneeling before the altar of the Holy Mother of God, Our Lady, with all of his armaments upon the altar. When it was full daylight, he devoutly heard Mass. After Mass, he had himself fitted with armor inside the church and ate a partridge in order to fortify himself. Then he went out to the field. When the hermit king was in the field, he saw the Moorish king with all his foot soldiers and horsemen. All the Moors climbed to the top of a hill to view the battle, and the Christians remained near the city. The hermit king held a well-sharpened lance and had a small shield on his arm, along with his sword and a dagger. The Moorish king had a bow and arrow, a sword, and on his head was a helmet wrapped with a turban. When the two brave kings were in the field, they charged at each other. The Moorish king quickly shot an arrow which hit the center of the hermit king's shield, passing freely by him near his arm, and at once the Moorish king shot another which hit him in the thigh. But with the armor the hermit king was wearing, the armor could not penetrate it completely. The hermit king hurled the lance at him when they were near. The Moorish king was very skillful with his arms. When he saw the lance coming, he deflected it with his bow. But this time the hermit king had drawn so near that the Moorish king could not shoot more arrows. When he was so close, he could almost touch him with his hand. The hermit king cried out in a loud voice, "If you help me, Lord, it will not matter if all the Moors in this world attack me." When the Moorish king saw him so near and realized that he could not shoot any arrows, he felt that he had lost. After the hermit king had thrown the lance, he quickly reached for his sword, and drawing as close to the Moorish king as he could, he gave him a mighty blow on the head. But he did little harm because of the thick turban the Moorish king wore. Then the hermit king struck him a mighty blow with the sword, cutting off his arm. And as he plunged his sword fully into the side of the Moorish king, into his side, the Moorish king fell to the ground. As quickly as he could, the hermit king cut off his head. Then he picked up his lance and stuck the head on the end of it, and rode back into the city in triumph. Imagine what rejoicing there was amongst the Christians, the women and the young girls, when they thought they were now released from their captivity. When the king was inside the city, he had the doctors brought to him, and they ministered to his wounds. On the morning of the following day, the king held his council in the bed where he lay, and it was decided that 2 knights would be sent as envoys to the Moors, to tell them that they wished to observe the pacts they had all agreed to and sworn to, and that they could go to their own lands in safety, with all their ships and clothing and jewelry, and that no one in the kingdom would harm them. The envoys departed, and when they were with the Moors, they explained their mission to them. They were given lodging and were asked to await the reply. The Moors told them this in order to do them great harm, for they were now very vengeful because of the death of their king. Among them a great dispute arose over whom they would make king. Some wanted Blnc, others wanted Adupkursk, cousin German of the dead king. Blnc was chosen king, and he immediately ordered the envoys seized, along with all who had come with them, and he had them put to death. They cut off their heads, put them inside a pack saddle, and sent them to the city on a mule. The guards who were in the city towers saw 2 horsemen driving the mule on. When they were near the city, they abandoned the mule and galloped away. The captain of the guards saw them and ordered 10 men on horseback to go and see what was all about. When they got there, they wished they had not gone out to see such a terrible thing, and they immediately went to tell the king and his entire council. When the king heard the news, he was very much taken aback, and he said, "Oh, cruel infidels, that you have little faith, for you cannot give what you do not have. Now I make a solemn vow, wounded as I am, never to enter a covered building except to hear mass in a church until I have driven these Moors from the entire kingdom." He quickly had his clothing brought to him, and he left his bed and had the trumpet sound. The first to leave the city was the king, and he had all the men who were more than 11 years old and less than 70 summoned, and under penalty of death they all had to follow him. That day his tents were raised on the very spot where the Moors had been defeated, and the king had a great deal of artillery for war brought out. When the virtuous countess learned that the king had proclaimed such a summons, and that those who were more than 11 years old were to follow him, she was very upset, for she realized that her son was included. So she hurried to where the king was, and fell to her knee on the hard ground. Then, with a grieving voice, she began to say, "Have pity on me. I have nothing of value except this son who is so young that he cannot help you. Grant me this favor in memory of your great friendship and love for my virtuous husband, and let me remind you, your grace, of the alms I used to give you when you were a hermit. Please hear my supplications, and leave my son with me. His father is dead, and the only thing I have to console me is this poor son." The king saw the countess's error, and quickly replied, "I would very much like to obey you, countess, if your petition were honorable and just, but it is well known that the men must learn to use arms, and they must know the practice of war and the gentle ways of this blessed order of chivalry. It is customary for men of honor to begin to use arms when they are very young, for they learn better at that age than any other, and because he is now at the best age in the world to see and understand the great honors that knights achieve, I wish to keep him in my company as my own son. He must come with me, and tomorrow I shall dub him a knight, so that he may imitate the virtuous actions of his father, William of Warwick." "I am called mother only by this son of mine," said the Countess, "and if he dies in battle, what will become of me? For I shall have lost my husband and my son, and all that I had in this miserable world." When the Countess had finished, her son began to speak. "Madam, I beg of you, please do not cry for me. You know that I have reached an age when I have to leave the protection of my mother's wings, and that I am worthy of bearing arms and going into battle to show the metal I am made of, and who my father was. If it is God's will, he will keep me from harm, and will allow me to carry out such actions that he will be pleased, and he will give consolation to my father's soul, and your grace will be made happy." When her son had gone, the Countess went into the city, weeping, and many virtuous women of the city went with her, consoling her as best they could. That night the king had the camp well guarded, and he allowed no one to take off their armor. In the morning, when the sun came out, he had the trumpet sound, and they moved the camp to within half a league of where the Moors were. When the tents were set up, he let the men rest. This happened after the noon hour. When the Moors learned that the Christians had come out of the city, they were astonished, because a short time before they had not dared to take a step out of the city, and now they came looking for them. Some of the captains said this was because of the great cruelty of their king, Blnc, who had killed the Christian ambassadors so cruelly, and they had said that they might be recruiting men from Spain or France. "That is why they are coming so near, and you can be sure that any of us they capture will be cut into shreds." One of the ambassadors who had just taken the letter of convene to the letter one of the ambassadors who had taken the letter to convene the joust said, "They paid us many honors, and as soon as we were in the city we saw great numbers of men in the towers, the squares, in the windows, and on the roofs. It was astonishing to see so many armed men. By Mohammed, I would guess there were 200,000 soldiers, and this wicked king killed their ambassadors without reason." After all the captains had heard the words of this ambassador, they talked to the other Moors who had gone into the city with him, and when they knew the truth of the situation, they killed Blnc and chose a new king. Nonetheless, they armed themselves for battle and went in sight of the Christians. The sun was nearly down, but they still decided to go up a nearby hill. When the hermit king saw them, he said, "In faith, they're afraid of us. That's why they've gone up such a high place. Let everyone do what I do, and with divine help we will have our vengeance on our enemies." He took a basket in one hand and a spade in the other, and went in front of them all. When the great lords saw the king do this, each of them did the same, and followed him. Before leaving the city, the virtuous king had procured everything necessary for the war. Around the palisade he had dug a deep ditch that led to a large water-hole, and they left a great entryway in the middle, through which 150 men could pass at one time. On the other side they dug another ditch that led to a high cliff. The king said, "Since we've finished, there are only 2 hours left till dawn. You, Duke of Gloucester, and you, Duke of Salisbury, go quickly to the Countess, and ask her to give me 2 large barrels that belong to William Warwick. They are full of copper spikes, and she will find them upstairs in the weapons room." They went there quickly, and begged and commanded her on the king's behalf, so that she gave them to them, even though she was upset with the king because he had not given her son back. But when she realized how great their need were, so she did it, although she could not help saying, "Lord, have mercy on me. What's going on with this, that this king knows so much about my house? There's nothing that I have that has to do with weapons or war that he doesn't know about. I don't know if he's the only guessing or if he's a wizard." The barons had the barrels of spikes loaded into carts and took them to the camp. When they were before the king, they told him everything the Countess had said, and the virtuous knight burst out laughing, and he smiled and joked with them at length. Afterwards he had the spikes taken to the gate, and they placed them on the ground so that when the Moors came through they would stick into their feet. He had also had many holes like wells dug, so that if they escaped one danger they would fall into another, and the Christians worked at this all night long. When daylight broke, the Moors began to beat drums, and they blew trumpets and pipes, and shouted their battle cries with great joy and streamed down the mountain to attack the Christians. The hermit king ordered all the men to lie down on the ground and pretend to be asleep. When they were almost within range of bombards, they all got up and gave signs of being unprepared for battle. When the Moors were inside the entryway, the king said, "Gentlemen, do not dismay. I beg you, let's turn our backs and pretend to run away." When the Moors saw them fleeing, they rushed forward as quickly as they could. They ran inside the entryway, which, as we have mentioned, they could not pass through because the copper spikes stuck into their feet. When the virtuous hermit king saw the Moors inside the entryway, he made his men slow down, like an expert in war and weaponry, and he saw the Moors stopping because of the wounds from the spikes, while others were falling into the wells that were covered by branches with dirt piled on top. Then the king began to shout with a loud voice, "O knights of honor, take your eyes from the city and turn your faces to the enemy of Christian faith. Let us attack with great courage, for this day is ours. Give them a cruel battle, and grant mercy to no one." The king was the first to strike a blow, and then the others followed. The Moors saw the Christians doing battle savagely, while they were all unable to move because of their wounds, and so they were forced to die, with great destruction was wrought unto them. Those who were coming behind saw how the Christians were slaughtering the Moors, and they fled back to the castle they had come from, without offering resistance. The king pursued them, killing and beheading as many as he could catch. When the king was worn out from his wounds, he stopped for a moment, and they captured a very tall Moor of enormous proportions. After the king had knighted the countess' son, he wanted him to kill that Moor, and very bravely the boy stabbed him with his sword until he killed him. When the king saw that the Moor was dead, he took the boy by the hair and threw him on top of the Moor, and rubbed him hard against the man, filling his eyes and face with blood, and he made him stick his hands into the wounds, and in that way he baptized him in the blood of the Moor. He grew up very bravely, and in his time a large part of the world there could not be found so worthy of a knight. When the good king saw the battle was won, he began to pursue the Moors, and he killed all those he caught. This was the greatest destruction and slaughter of men that took place in that time, for 97,000 Moors died in the space of 10 days. Since the king could not walk well because of his wounds, they brought him a horse so he could ride. "In truth I shall not," said the king,